2025. And it feels, as it has for a while, like it's been a terribly long time. We've been waiting and waiting and waiting for the return of our Lord. And he's not yet here. And sometimes when I talk to people, I detect a kind of almost distancing of ourselves from disappointment. We feel worried and disappointed that the Lord has not yet come. And so to make sure that we don't keep on feeling disappointed and hurt, we try and tell ourselves that it doesn't matter when he comes. Could be 10 years, could be 20 years, could be 50 years. It doesn't matter, does it? And we tell ourselves these things. I want to tell you that I think that's the wrong approach. We love Jesus Christ with all of our heart. And we want him here. And if we do, we will be that kid in the car saying, are we nearly there yet? Are we nearly there yet? Are we nearly there yet? That'll be us. And yes, there will be times of disappointment. We thought we were nearly there, but we're not. But we don't stop saying, how long? I want to show you a little snippet from an article from about 1940, I think 5, 6, 7, 41. There you go. So this is from an article called Times, should be Times and Seasons, not Time and Seasons, Times and Seasons by Islip Collier. And he said this: a first thought which arises to the mind in a review of past expositions of time periods is that it's unwise to make a very definite expression of opinion regarding their fulfillment. So what he's saying is this: when you're thinking about the things to do with when Christ will come, it seems to us unwise to say it will be on Thursday, the 23rd of November at 11 a.m. Bad idea. He goes on to say, whilst it is a mistake to probe too deeply or to speak too confidently regarding this complex subject, it is a still worse error to be indifferent. Faithful disciples of Christ must always be interested in the question, how long? So what we're saying is this: yes, it feels like it's been a long time. It feels like it's been a hard road. It feels like sometimes people told us it would be 1988 and it wasn't. But that doesn't mean that we stop saying how long. Oh, sure, let's not pin our hearts and our hopes on a specific day and hour. But God gave us lots of signposts. And he gave us lots of really interesting time periods. And he said, have a look at these. He didn't say, you'll have no idea. He said, here are the signposts. Here are the time periods. And if we love him, we will be among those saying, how long? How long, O Lord? Now, I'm not suggesting that every single person here has to love prophecy and has to love time periods and make that your favorite topic of study. I mean, that'd make me happy if you all did, but we're all different, right? But we all need to be that kid in the backseat. We absolutely do. Don't ever get to the point where you say, oh, it doesn't matter how long it will be. It does. It really does. And if we as an ecclesia can be passionate about that, we're a meeting that says we want Christ here, we want him here soon, that will change the way we live and behave as a meeting, won't it? And that will be a very, very wonderful thing for the Lord to find when he comes. Because you see, we know this passage really well. Revelation 16, we're told by Christ that he would come as a thief. I'm sure I've told you the way this flows before. Revelation 16, it's written by John. He's talking about things he sees. And all of a sudden, without any introduction, Jesus writes a verse, just one verse, inserts it in his voice. It doesn't say, and I, John, heard Jesus say, behold, I come as a thief. This is Christ inserting a verse into John's record. He says, I'm coming as a thief. That is unexpectedly. Thieves don't announce their arrival. I mean, that would be a really cool idea, given the average crime rate in the world, and particularly in our state. Maybe what they could do is, rather than doing it unexpectedly, they could book a time, tell us when we're coming. We could do it in the convenience of a time we chose, but they don't. They arrive when nobody is expecting. And just so we're absolutely clear, the context of this passage is that straight after this, John keeps talking as if Christ had never interrupted, and he says, and he, God, gathered them, the kings of the earth, to a place called Armageddon. The context of Christ coming as a thief unexpectedly is just before Armageddon. And sometimes I hear people say, oh, well, that's to the world, but it's not, is it? Because you see, the world don't have garments that they need to keep clean. And Christ never said to the world, you've got to be watching. He said it to us. And so being alert and watching, yes, not necessarily watching for time periods, not necessarily watching a newspaper. There are lots of different types of watching, but watching nonetheless. Christ said, watch ye therefore. We don't know when our master's coming. Could be at even or at midnight or cock crowing. Even in the morning, we don't know. He said to us, watch. And don't be found asleep. Because you see, that's what happens if we let our perspective waver. If we say, look, it doesn't matter. It could be any time. The urgency drops. And the tendency is to drift. And in the words of Christ here, perhaps to sleep. Peter said, knowing this first, there shall come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lust, saying, where's the there's no evidence. It could be ages, decades, centuries, perhaps. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's not a 7,000-year plan. Maybe it's a 20,000-year plan. So how is it that some of us get like that? How does that happen, where we stop watching? And we know, he says there will be some like that. When he comes, there will be some people who are asleep. God willing, none in this meeting, but there will be some asleep. There will be some who are not watching, whose garments are perhaps not clean. How does that happen? Well, the passage we read just now told us. It's about sobriety. There's going to be some people getting drunk. Well, what do they mean by that? Is that a spiritualization or is it literal? Is it a problem with people literally being drunk, or is he saying spiritually they're drunken? I think the answer is kind of both. Christ, again, Luke 21, he said, be on your guard so your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and worries of this life. I think in this verse, we've got two types of drunkenness. One of them being the party lifestyle, the dissipation and drunkenness. And on the flip side, the things of this life that stress us, that fill us, that make us unstable. So we can't make good decisions. Will I still have a job in a year's time? If I don't push really hard and work whenever the boss says, will I be able to pay the mortgage? I think these are the things that distract some of the saints, that make some of the saints sleepy, lose their focus. Back to Thessalonians. he said to the brothers and sisters, and I can see lots of you going, what on earth is that picture meant to represent? I'll let you think about that for a bit. He said in Thessalonians, now on the topic of signs and seasons, brothers and sisters, I don't need to tell you anything. You know he's coming like a thief. And then he tells them a little bit more about how that thief-like advent happens. He says, people will be saying peace and safety. There's going to be a time of peace and security. And that's when the labor pains mentioned by Christ in Matthew 24 strike those who are deceived. The world scenario, if you like, the world scene is going to look, oh, so terribly friendly. And behind its back, it's got a gun. There's going to be false peace that will deceive some. And when we did the same class, the Signs of the Times class last year, we were in the middle of a whole bunch of wars, weren't we? Now, we're not out the other side yet, but things have changed, haven't they? We're sort of in quite a different place now. I mean, Israel was in a whole lot of trouble last time we did a Signs of the Times class. We had confidence that God would bring them through, but they were surrounded by 4 main enemies who were causing lots and lots of trouble for them. Iran had 4 proxies who were attacking Israel. It was Syria to the northeast, Lebanon to the north, Gaza to the west, and to the south, those Houthis in Yemen. All of them were causing Israel problems last time we did a Signs of the Times class. Where are we now? The whole of the Middle East is being restructured and reconfigured as we look, and it's a completely different scenario. And a treaty has been signed, or a ceasefire has been signed between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. It looks like it's breaking down. We'll know on Saturday whether it's going to fall completely apart and they're back at war again. But nonetheless, we're at the point where a peace has been there for a few weeks. And Israel could be said to have had the upper hand. The Palestinians, I just want to add this in. This is a little bit of a digression, I guess, but we're hearing a lot in the media about, how terrible Israel is, and genocide, and they're not letting aid through, and they've behaved despicably towards the Palestinians, and certainly here in Australia, where the ABC has such a very loud voice, and most of the papers are really not interested in anything that resembles actual reporting, it can be very hard to understand what is going on there in Israel. So I just wanted to cover this off briefly, maybe for some of the young people who are bumping into people who are saying, oh, these terrible Israelis, they're doing bad things, they're committing genocide. I just want to put a few slides up to help with that. This ceasefire is resulting in the release of hostages and prisoners, hostages from Gaza, prisoners from Israel. And it's very interesting to look at the demographics of the two different groups. So this is the demographics, a very broad set of demographics of the Palestinian prisoners that are being released by Israel in order to secure the release of the hostages from Gaza. Now, for starters, hugely greater number of Palestinians being released for every Israeli. Something like 10 to 1. And I guess if you want to look at Israel in a negative light, you would say, see, they've got so many of them. But when you have a look at the demographics, it is interesting. Over 90% of the prisoners being released from Israel are male. And an enormous proportion of them are in the sort of adult age bracket, 18 to 59. There are none who are below 13 years old. There are 24 between 14 and 17, and every single one of them has been accused, and there is some evidence to support them being involved in violent crime. Terrorist action of some sort. Every one of those 14 to 17-year-olds did something. On the Israeli side, the statistics are flipped. Far more women, almost 40% of them are women who are hostages. Now, it's really hard to get an accurate read on exactly who the hostages are, even still, and which ones are alive and which ones are dead. So these figures are a little bit fudgy, but they're going to be close enough. Far more women amongst the Israeli hostages being released, which says that Gaza was holding more women. And in terms of the demographics, yes, there's a lot of adult men there being released. But look at the 0 to 13. 26 hostages who weren't even adults. One of them only 9 months old. A hostage at 9 months. There is no equivalence there. There is no right there. And when we look at the death toll, people say, oh, the death toll is terrible. You know, the number of Palestinians who are being killed, casualties on the sidelines of this war. It's absolutely awful. And yes, it is. In every war, it's absolutely awful. And this is no exception. But have a look at this. Here is the reported death toll for just a snapshot of a period throughout this conflict in Gaza. What do you notice about that death toll? Does it look really, really even to you? Because it is. Now, that's not a made-up statistic. This has been reported across a lot of the media. When Hamas were reporting their death toll, they had a range of numbers they used, and the numbers never dropped below, I think it was 112, or got above 313 in a given day throughout that period. And that was very, very even. Isn't that surprising? You'd think if you were engaging in a war, some days lots of people would die and other days not so many. And even more interestingly is this. Now, this probably won't make a lot of sense, but what this is showing is the ratio of women killed according to Hamas, to children killed, according to Hamas, on a given day. Now, if you think about it, you would always expect that there is some sort of sensible ratio between women and children, because where women are, you're likely to find little children. And so when women are killed, you're going to have children killed, and vice versa. There should be some connection between those two numbers. Not so much men, because you might find a big group of men who just happen to be wearing bandanas and holding big guns in the middle of a field somewhere and manage to blow them up altogether. But women and children, you'd expect there to be some relationship between their number of deaths. And what this chart shows is, according to Hamas, there's none whatsoever, which again, statistically says that the numbers they are releasing are wrong. They're not right. For whatever reason. And I think we all have our opinion as to what reason Hamas might have for releasing fraudulent figures in terms of a death toll. But nonetheless, if the media wanted to prove that it was fraudulent, it's not hard. The numbers are all there. So when people say to you, this is genocide, that's not really true. And by the way, the statistics show that even using the figures given by Hamas to describe the death toll in Gaza, the number of civilian casualties is among the lowest of all urban wars fought in recent history. The wars the Americans fought in Iraq had much higher levels of civilian casualties than what Israel have achieved, even according to Hamas. That's pretty impressive. In other words, yes, people are dying who shouldn't be dying. Yes, there are casualties, people caught in the crossfire. But Israel is doing a better job than any other military on the planet of preserving civilians. Well, what's happened? They've been forced to a ceasefire. But in the meantime, Hamas, as we know, have had a pretty bad time of it. This chart, it's pretty small, I know, but it shows the leadership of Hamas at the beginning of the conflict. And these are the ones Israel have managed to take out since the beginning of that conflict. Most of the publicly known senior leadership of Hamas have been killed during this war. And Hamas is still a force to be reckoned with. I suspect if there was an election in Gaza today, they would probably get voted back in again. That is the tragedy of life in Gaza. But what will never be the same again is that Hamas will not trust Iran to support them. You see, this whole thing started because the Iranians said this would be a really good idea. The Hamas leadership flew to Iran to talk to them about this particular attack on October the 7th, 2023. The Iranian leadership said, we're right behind you. You go and do this. We've got your back. And then left Hamas high and dry. And so Hamas, who are a different religious faction to Iran, won't trust them again. And so no matter what happens, Gaza will be different going forwards. We'll see whether Mr. Trump gets his wish of opening up a new seaside Riviera for the rich and famous. I've got something to say on that in a bit, and I really don't think it will happen, but we can come back to that soon. Now, by the way, if anyone has anything they want to add or anything they want to say, I'm quite happy to just lecture you all night, but if there's something you want to add in, please feel free to go for it. Both sides of politics are wrong. They are both at war with God and God's values. It doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right. Trump is just as wrong as Biden, whether or not God is using him. And yes, Trump might do some things where we think, oh, that's excellent, wonderful. He's supporting the Jews. But that doesn't make him a good man, nor does it make him a man that we want to follow. And the right-leaning media has some of the same flaws as the left-leaning media, just in different areas. Its biases are just as ugly and godless. And so it's difficult for us. And we say, okay, well, let's go and look for independent news sources. But unfortunately, these days, anything can be faked. Give me 15 minutes and I will make you a movie that shows Albanese going into Gaza with an Uzi and killing people. I can do that, and so can most people, because AI is that good these days. We can't trust anything that we see. And so maybe the best solution is to talk one to another and listen carefully to one another when we're seeing these different articles. There is a site, and this is not at all a push or saying, you should use the site or anything, but it's worth having a look at, called Grounded News. And its whole purpose is to expose those biases for you. And what it does is, for every news article, it'll show you every news outlet that is running that topic. And then it'll show you where those news outlets sit on a kind of like a continuum of biases. So when you've got an article and it says, Trump has done this wonderful thing and he's the new Messiah coming to America, you can have a look and see how many left-leaning sources reported the same article and work out for yourself whether maybe there's validity or not. So it's just a way of balancing out the media and trying to get a better idea of where the biases lie. It'll also show you blind spots, so areas that the typical news sources you use won't see anything because their blind spot doesn't let them see it. They're not interested in that. So grounded news, worth having a look at if you're interested in that sort of thing. All right, so Hamas severely diminished. And then, well, there was that whole thing in Syria, right? And where did that come from? Almost overnight, the regime in Syria was toppled. Bashar al-Assad was on the run up to Moscow, shaking hands with Putin, buying himself a Dakar and disappearing into the never-never from what it appears. And all of a sudden, Syria was again in turmoil, but a whole new regime coming in. And it was really interesting. We were trying to see, well, what's going to happen? Is Turkey going to get a stronghold? Is America going to get a stronghold? And, well, now we've got a new interim leader, interim president. He's got several names. I can't remember all of them. Ahmed al-Sharan or something like that is one of them, but he's actually had quite a few names. But look at that. So again, Syria was a proxy. In other words, they were fighting Iran's war with Israel on behalf of Iran. And all of a sudden, that's gone. It's not going to happen anymore. Syria is saying they won't fight Iran's war anymore. And that one is really important because you see the way that Iran was successfully getting all of these missiles and guns and money and all this sort of stuff into Hezbollah and Hamas and other enemies in the region was because, well, they could get them through Iraq easily because who looks at Iraq? And then through Syria because Syria was saying, yeah, fine, come on through. And now that will no longer happen. America's got a control of most of that kind of eastern border of Syria. And its new leader says, no, we don't want anything to do with Iran anymore. And then the last one of those proxies was Lebanon. And I think this one was perhaps the most dramatic. 12 days went from this is going to be a long and difficult war to Hezbollah is done. Like, they're not even strong in Lebanon anymore, let alone being able to project force beyond Lebanon. And I'm sure we all saw the news. There was the whole thing with the pages, right? Did anyone not hear about the thing with the pages? Do I need to go through the thing with the pages? Someone did. Oh, someone didn't hear about the thing with it. So it appears that Israel, for about 5 years, has had a cunning plan. See, what they did is they spoke to, they kind of put it about in the intelligence channels that they were very good at hacking into mobile phones, which they are. And so they made various terrorist groups feel a little bit nervous that if they held a mobile phone, maybe Israel could hear what they were saying. And then what they did is they worked out which pages terrorists like. Now, I don't know how you do that. I don't know if there's like fashion magazines for terrorists saying, buy this pager, it's the best. But anyway, they worked out which pages terrorists tend to buy. And they went to that company and they said, we would love to manufacture pages under your brand. And then they hired the best saleswoman in that particular company and they shipped all of that over to somewhere in Europe and they started making pages that were now branded exactly the same way as the favorite pages of the terrorists. And they had their favorite sales lady also, who, by the way, had no idea what was going on. She just thought, another company is coming in and trying to make some money. Unbeknownst to her and this unfortunate Taiwanese company that owned the brand of these pages, they had taken the battery and carved a piece out of the battery and put into it a very powerful explosive and a system that would only detonate the explosive when a particular message was sent to that pager. And then they sent their saleswoman into Lebanon and said, sell. Now, initially, Hezbollah were like, I don't know, I think we can get a better deal. So she cut her price. She was really keen to get her commission. And she kept on cutting her price and she said, just try them out. These ones are better than normal. They're slightly bigger, but that's because they're more durable. They were slightly bigger because they had a bomb in them. Anyway, in the end, Hezbollah went for it. They bought lots of them and they gave them to all of the sort of rank and file amongst Hezbollah. And this was believed to be a safe way to ensure that Hezbollah operatives could not be listened in on. And indeed, Israel was not able to listen in on those pages because you can't talk on a pager. And then one day, September the 17th, Israel sent that signal. And boom, went pages all over Lebanon. And they had so perfectly calibrated the amount of explosive in these pages that it only, it seems, injured or killed people carrying those pages, that is, terrorists. Absolutely. There's footage of people in a crowded shopping mall and the bomb goes off and everyone runs away and the terrorist falls down. Amazing. And then on the 18th, this is just cruel. You see, they'd realised that not everyone wanted to carry a pager because, pages aren't everybody's shtick. Some people like walkie-talkies, so they've done the whole same thing with a range of walkie-talkies. And so when the pagers blew up, everyone who maybe had left their pager home that day went, oh, thank goodness I wasn't carrying that. I'll take my walkie-talkie for safety. And the next day, they pressed the button on the walkie-talkies and boom, went the walkie-talkies as well. And so a whole wide range of Hezbollah were killed as a consequence of these things. Well, there was a bit of to and fro. Hezbollah sent some rockets in. Israel sent more rockets back, etc., etc., etc. So it went. But at the end of the day, Israel managed to kill Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, in his base in Beirut. Now, how they knew he was there, that's just really, really good spy work. But this man has led Hezbollah for decades and been the person who's been the thorn in Israel's side. One by one, Israel managed to pick off all the key leadership of Hezbollah. In fact, one afternoon, I recall that they had just blown up the vice leader of Hezbollah. So Hezbollah anointed a new leader and they killed him too, later that same day. And Hezbollah has been so seriously decimated that they have had to promote a whole lot of their junior leadership into senior leadership roles in Hezbollah. And you think, oh yeah, well, I guess that means they've got a lot of juniors as bosses. They won't be quite as practiced. No, that's not the problem. The problem is this. Israel had infiltrated the junior leadership of Hezbollah. It's quite well known. And Hezbollah doesn't know which of Israel's spies they've just promoted. And it's going to be a long time before they find out. And so, the Middle East is a different place, isn't it? Hezbollah neutralized, Syria turned, Hamas not the force they were, and those Houthis down in Yemen, well, now everyone's got time to gang up on them. And they're a long way away. And Iran's in a really bad place because you'll remember that Iran sent rockets into Israel, lots of them, and Israel knocked some of them down. They got hit by others. So they sent some back and then Iran did it again. So this time Israel sent planes, fighters up over Iran, knocked out a whole lot of key missile radar systems, if you like. Now, the very interesting thing about that, firstly, is that they sent planes rather than firing missiles. Firing a missile is kind of like throwing a rock at the bully. Flying a plane is like walking straight up to the bully and punching him in the face. It's much more personal. It's much more, you're putting a lot more at risk. And for Israel to fly all these planes over Iran was effectively saying to Iran, by the way, we can do this and you can't. You can't send planes over us, but we can put bombers in your skies. And what's more, we can knock out your best missile systems and damage your ability to make new missiles. Now what are you going to do? And it's really interesting because Iran said, oh, we're going to shoot again. But they haven't. And I think we can be pretty confident it's because they're scared, because suddenly Israel is the superpower in the Middle East. And suddenly everyone knows that America is backing them in strange and unusual ways. You never know what Mr. Trump might do one morning when he decides he doesn't like, I don't know, Jordan anymore. And we expected this. Ezekiel 38 said that before the events of Ezekiel 38, people on the mountains of Israel would be living securely. Now that word securely, it's only used two ways in the Bible. It's either used of those who are living in trust of God, therefore their security is guaranteed, or those whose security is false because they don't trust God. Well, we know which one this is. But nonetheless, they would be living securely. They would trust that they were safe, even though they did not have faith in the living God. But Ezekiel 38 says the same thing again. When Gog comes down, he says, I'm going to go against those who are living in security, living without walls and barred gates. Well, that's kind of been Israel's thing for the last, 30 years? They're really good at walls and barred gates. It's what they're famous for. Go to Israel and see the walls. But I bet you we're going to start seeing them come down. We're going to see a real change in Israel over the next few years if the Lord remains away. We know that to be so because you see the very thing that attracts Gog down. And by the way, this is the third time it emphasizes the same point in Ezekiel 38. The very thing that attracts Gog to come down is when he realizes, oh, they're dwelling securely now. On the day when my people become or are living securely, then you'll take notice. See, there's a change. Something changes. And somewhere before Armageddon, Israel dwells securely. And Gog goes, oh, that's different. That's my cue. Isn't that remarkable? So what's going to happen next in Israel? Well, we can't say for sure, right? But Ezekiel 38 gives us some guidance. Ezekiel 38 said this: when Gog comes, he's going to come to the people who are gathered on the mountains of Israel. Well, where are the mountains of Israel? Well, we'll get there. Thank you for that acceleration of our talk. I'll just skip my next 25 slides. Hold it. Yes, exactly. But defining it from the Bible is the trick, isn't it? And it's actually a little bit tricky to define exactly where the mountains of Israel are. There's this passage that suggests that Hebron is in the mountains of Israel. This passage suggests that Jerusalem is one of the mountains of Israel. And then in Joshua, we have a number of cities, all of which are incredibly hard to find, but also in the mountains of Israel. And look, if we put them on a map, as Auntie Beth accurately said, they're all in the West Bank. And if you have a look at the West Bank, well, the West Bank is where all the mountains are. Now, just so the young people get to say at least one sentence tonight, Does anyone know why the West Bank is called the West Bank? Who is a young person? Go for it, Esther, if you really want to.
It's the West Bank of Jordan.
That's right. It's the West Bank from Jordan's perspective. It's the West Bank of the Jordan River. It's not the West anything for Israel, it's in the East. If you're Jewish, the West Bank is in the East. And if you're Israeli, you don't even call it the West Bank, you call it Judea and Samaria. So when Israelis talk about the West Bank, they talk about Judea and Samaria, and that is where the mountains are. I went to a talk not long ago, call it 5 years ago, by the English-speaking spokesman for the IDF worldwide. He was here in Perth, and someone said to him, if another big war breaks out, what are you going to do? He says, I know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take the West Bank. And they said, why? He said, well, at the moment, our country is indefensible. All of our industrial heartland is down on the flat. We've got no high ground. He said, we will take the West Bank. The mountains of Israel are what Gog invades primarily. That's what Ezekiel 38 says. And the mountains of Israel, Ezekiel 38 says, is the place where the people who have been gathered out of all nations, the Jews, reside. So we've got to see a change, don't we? We have to see Israel take the West Bank. And we should be watching. Now, this doesn't have to happen before Christ comes to us, but we should be watching for it nonetheless. And so when Mr. Trump says, oh, look, I'm going to clean out Gaza, we'll shift everyone out to a new country and I'll build a new Riviera on the Mediterranean, actually, maybe he'll get lost. And maybe it's the West Bank that he'll clean out and open up for new subdivisions and housing blocks. Who knows? But somehow or other, we have to see the children of Israel on the mountains of Israel. Which begs the question, well, what about Gaza? What happens with Gaza? Well, here's a passage clearly taken from the time when Christ is king. At that time, the Lord will again lift his hand to reclaim the remnant of his people from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, etc. This is the second gathering, not the gathering that happened in 1948 and beyond, but a gathering post-Armageddon. In Isaiah 11. And Christ will lift a signal flag, the ensign on the mountains. He will gather Israel's dispersed people and assemble Judah's scattered people from the four corners of the earth. But look at what happens after that. They swoop down on the Philistines' hills to the west. Who's to the west of Israel today? Well, it's Gaza, isn't it? The Palestinians, not the Philistines, but you see, it's the same word. Palashet, Philistine, Palestinian, same word in the original languages. And this is not the only place. Obadiah says, the day of the Lord is approaching for all nations. Again, context of Armageddon. On Mount Zion, there will be a remnant of those who escape in a holy place once again. Jesus has clearly come. The descendants of Jacob will be a fire, the descendants of Joseph a flame, the descendants of Esau will be like stubble before them, etc., etc. The people of the Negev will take possession of Esau's mountain, and here we go, and the people of the foothills will take possession of the land of the Palashet, the land of the Palestinians. Or Joel 3. Again, behold in those days and at that time when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all nations and bring them into the valley of Jehoshaphat. This is Armageddon. And after that, what do I have to do with you, he says, O Tyre and Sidon, and all the coasts of the Palestinians. He's going to take recompense upon them. So what does that tell us? Well, long story short, we should expect Gaza to continue to be a thorn in Israel's side from now until after the Battle of Armageddon. They're not going anywhere. So if you're looking at a map of Israel, we should expect the West Bank to become a place where Israel dwells securely, and we should expect Gaza to still be a problem until after Armageddon. All right, a few other things. Anyone want to toss anything else on that piece? Nope? Okay. A couple of other things. We'll fly through these. You may have heard of there's a little thing happening out there in technology at the moment called AI, artificial intelligence. Probably most of you haven't heard of it. It's pretty new. But I'm going to show you a passage. Look, I'm not 100% confident about this. I'm sharing it with you to show you my thoughts, and you can tell me what you think. But the last chapter of Daniel is a chapter in which God says to Daniel, look, the message of Daniel, and particularly the last great prophecy from chapter 10 onwards, is going to be sealed to the time of the end. And then he says, it's almost a strange line. He says, many will run to and fro and knowledge will be increased. And he doesn't seem to be saying by that phrase, lots of people will be running around so that they can understand Daniel. Many people will be dashing around to understand the prophecy of Daniel, because you see, many people won't at the time of the end. A few will, but not many. In global terms, certainly. So probably this dashing around and knowledge being increased refers to something else. And maybe it's just talking about this, well, it seems to be a sign of the time, so maybe it is this AI thing we're seeing. And this AI thing is, look, it's actually terrifying, because I don't know about you, and maybe you've got some ideas, but I can't see what that's going to do to us yet. But I know it's going to do something, and I know it won't be good when it comes. Because every time the world develops some new life-altering thing, it's got a sting in the tail because, well, it's invented by the flesh. It's invented by sinful men, and this will be no exception. But I just want to show you briefly kind of how spectacular this thing is. So there's a problem in science. This is just one thing that AI is working on. There's a problem in science called the protein folding problem. And it's to do with the fact that when you have these very, very long proteins, such as we have in our bodies and blood and in skin and all of those sorts of things, the thing that makes those proteins do what they do is the way they fold up into these intricate shapes. And those intricate shapes, those structures of the proteins, define what they're able to do in our bodies or in the environment elsewhere. And so all the enzymes and proteins we use are useful predominantly because of the way they fold up. And they fold up in a very specific and complex way based on various attractive properties, bits that stretch and don't stretch, bits that can bolt onto other bits within the protein. And there's a natural fold, but working out that natural fold is nigh on impossible. The first one to be done was done in 1976 and took over 10 years of exhaustive effort. By the end of the 70s, there were less than 10 protein structures that were worked out. And as you can see here, little by little, we were working out how these proteins folded, which was important because it told us how these proteins helped us and what they did. And then by 2021, we had about 180,000 common proteins with their folds all worked out, and we kind of were able to use them in various different things, and those structures were useful to scientists. Along came AI, and here's what AI did, a thing called deep fold, in 1 year. Ready? 1 year. 1 year, we went from 180,000 proteins where we'd worked out the way they folded with laborious human effort, taking what? 40 years, 50 years to get that far. 1 year later, 200 million of them. Almost all of them that we know of that are possible. 1 year, 200 million. You think, well, that's pretty useless. Actually, it's not. It's already contributing to science in ways that are going to change things. For example, one of those proteins has been found to be the key thing they needed to work out how to build a great vaccine for malaria. That's going to change. They're using it also to build anti-venoms for snakes, because currently anti-venoms have a low shelf life and are really hard to make and transport. They're going to be able to synthesize them. These are just two things that have just come out in the last year because, well, these AI things nutted out how to do it. Now, I'm going to try and show you something. I'm going to show you something on my computer. You can't see it, but hopefully you'll be able to hear it. And what this is it's a thing called Notebook GPT or something like that. I can't remember. It's from Google. And you just feed books into it. So you just feed it books. And then you can ask it questions about those books, which is kind of handy, particularly if you wanted to cheat at school, for instance, Charlie. It'd be really handy for that. You could just give it your textbook and then ask it questions and pop out with the answer. But you can also do this with it. So this took, I'd estimate 30 seconds. 30 seconds to build this thing. And let's see if we can hear it. Sound. How do I get my sound up?
Those signs of the times, those hints throughout history, maybe even right now, they could point to, big changes.
And you've got a pretty interesting stack of sources to help us unpack all that.
Oh, yeah. We've got historical analysis, biblical interpretation, even some social commentary from way back in the 1800s.
Yeah.
Just to shake things up a bit, You send over some really fascinating stuff.
It does look like it'll be an interesting journey. So where should we start?
Let's set the stage first. Elpis Israel really dives into those 430 years leading up to the time of Christ. Years of, well, let's just say, a lot of upheaval for the Jewish people.
It's striking how that source emphasizes not just the events themselves, but how people interpreted them. The Babylonian captivity, all those empires rising and falling, the temple.
We could go on and on and on. That was a podcast on the collected writings of Brother Thomas. I've got 30 of them in here at the moment. And I told Chat, this tool, I said, give me something on the return of Christ and the signs of the times. And 30 seconds later, that was the podcast that it produced. By interrogating all of the works of John Thomas that I've fed it, and it was going to spend it looks like it's a 20-minute podcast on the signs of the times based on the writings of John Thomas. Which, is pretty cool. And it's also, well, is it accurate? That one is probably pretty accurate. Now, you've touched on a really important point. Arnie Franz touched on the point that most of the big common AIs out there have a problem called hallucination. And hallucination is partly formed from the fact that when they feed in all of this information, the AI doesn't know which information is true and which information is lies, and probably the people who fed it in didn't know either. But also because just the whole process by which it comes to its answer, it leads it to sort of make these conclusions based on things that it's already said, and part of that can lead it down a kind of track that ends up with it saying complete nonsense. So Arnie Franz got an excellent point. These things are only partially trustworthy. Yeah, Esther. Exactly where I'm going with this thought. Exactly. So we went through all of history in which God was the arbiter of truth. And if not God, well, one of the gods was the arbiter of truth. There was a higher source of truth always for all people. And then we come down to the Renaissance, and that started being eroded. We had people like Descartes saying, I think, therefore I am. And what he meant by that is, well, I decide what is truth. And then we came down to our era where we were post-truth. And, well, there is no God, and you believe whatever you like, and there's no higher source. And all of a sudden, what has humanity done? We've invented a higher source. This higher source just happens to have consumed all human knowledge. So ChatGPT, which is the leader at the moment from OpenAI, they believe that they have consumed about 85% of all written resources that we've ever created. Now, it hasn't yet watched every YouTube, but it will. And all of a sudden, you just ask it any question you like. And I mean literally any question you like. And it's going to come up with an answer. And it's going to be, I asked it, I had to do some studies last week. And so I asked it to work out for me based on how hard the skull of Goliath might have been, how fast the stone had to fly, how big the stone was, how tall David would have to be, and what type of stone it was. And it came up with answers. And they were plausible. Look, I don't know what AI is going to do, but what I can tell you is we're in really dangerous territory. And we need to be really watching out to see what this thing does, because it is going to change things, just as the internet changed things irrevocably, just as social media changed things irrevocably. This will do the same. A couple of other things, and then we'll wrap up. All right. Where are we? Is Russia failing? Well, they're certainly not succeeding in defeating Ukraine. But these statistics from the Bank of Finland. So if anyone's going to have a negative slant on Russia, it's going to be the Finns. They keep on getting invaded by the Russians. How's Russia going according to the Bank of Finland? Well, their debt as a percentage of GDP is falling. Their unemployment rate is falling. And their GDP, after a bit of a blip in 2022, is rising again. And get this, here are two different ranking systems that are probably the most recognized rankings out there of who has the strongest military on the planet. Now, the Lowy Institute reckons that Russia has the third strongest on the planet. But you see, nobody quotes the Lowy Institute. Everybody quotes Global Power Statistics, I think it's called, or Global Power Rankings. And I mean everybody, like Forbes, The Economist, any news source worth their salt. When they're trying to work out who's got the toughest army, they all quote that source, and they say Russia's number 2 in the world, despite everything that's happened. I find that quite remarkable. And here's what the Rand Institute, an American think tank, had to say about the Russian army just recently. So this is about 4 months ago. They said this, and a lot of these quotes came from senior American military leaders. Talking about the state of the Ukraine war in April, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Brown Jr., told reporters that Russia had aggressively reconstituted its military force. Now, bear in mind, he's talking in late 2024. He's not talking in 23 or 22. He's saying right now, that's what Russia's doing. They are aggressively reconstituting their military force. And as an example of that, in January, Mr. Putin said, I'm going to call up another 140,000 people to join the army, making Russia the country with the second largest standing army on the planet. He went on to say, understanding the speed of that reconstitution is vitally important. He was saying in the article, it's fast. They're rebuilding their army even while fighting Ukraine quickly. But the speed doesn't tell the whole story. The nature of Russia's military constitution matters too. A combination of factors has allowed Russia to replenish its supplies of equipment and personnel even after suffering tremendous losses in Ukraine during the last 2 years. At the moment, Russia is building a larger military and structuring it to fight large land wars. That's interesting. And as an example of what they're doing, they're saying now that Russia is capable of building over 1,500 tanks a year. Europe, all of Europe, has got 6,000 tanks. And Russia can build 1,500 of them in a year. That's quite something. So I put that up as the final thing I wanted to look at. And I know we've gone a bit over time, but I wanted you to understand Russia is not down and out. And again, I personally don't think Mr. Putin will be the man who leads Russia to Armageddon. I think maybe he's a little bit too old for that. And he's perhaps doesn't have enough years left in him, but nonetheless, he's doing the right things for a Gog-like figure. And if he's not Gog, he definitely would like to be. So, what's this year going to be like for us as an ecclesia? Well, hopefully it's going to be one of longing and looking and saying, how long? When Christ told us he was coming, he said, who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his Lord has made ruler over his household? And I love that word household because it's the word therapia. House of healing. I hope that this year we can make this ecclesia one in which we're all working for each other, trying to heal each other, and watching and all of us coming together and saying, brother, sister, what do you think? How long? Are we nearly there yet? Are we nearly there yet? And that in some way or other, every member of this ecclesia can be that kid in that back seat who's trying to find a way to get there faster and help everyone on the road. God bless. Thank you.